Welcome to the Homegrown podcast, a place where we share the truth about food and farming from our kitchen to yours. I'm your host, Liz Hazelmeyer, along with my husband, Joey.
Good afternoon.
And together we hope to educate, inspire, and equip you in your pursuit of true nourishment. Today's guest is Christa Biegler. Christa is an author, podcast host, and private practice owner, helping health-savvy women overcome food sensitivities and fatigue without restrictive dieting to beat bloat, burnout, and eczema breakouts. She has a passion for subclinical thyroid issues, the nervous system, and stealth biotoxins. And she lives with her unicycling husband and kids in the Midwest. Christa, welcome to the show.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Unicycling.
Makes me sound pretty nerdy in that bio, which is perfect because that's the level we are at today.
I loved it. I was like, unicycling? I have to ask.
I'm interested in the unicycling.
What does that mean? What's going on?
Yeah, you want to
Tell
know?
us.
Well, actually, my husband in college, that was one of the reasons I was attracted to him because, you know, if we really want to go back to the early 2000s, my fourth grade dream, well, and this goes way before this, my fourth grade dream was to go to Machu Picchu. So when they hung up a poster in the Department of Nutrition at my college that they were taking an ag trip to Argentina, my 21-year-old wisdom said, that's a great idea. I should go to Argentina in preparation to go to Peru, which makes no sense at all.
Mm-hmm.
So I went on this ag trip and I met this guy, and long story short, I couldn't get rid of him. But one of my attraction points was that he could unicycle, because I was like, well, that was fun and unique, right? Because he doesn't seem like a unicyclist. So that hung on the wall. He got into unicycling in college. It was just like one of those college things, right? Where you just drink beer and try to ride a unicycle.
Yep.
And then for our daughter's 8th birthday, he got her a unicycle. And then the rest is kind of history. We live in a very small town, so just little by little, I think we could win the Guinness Book of World Records for most unicyclists per capita, because we just started training all of the kids in our kids' class how to unicycle. And so this is the first year. My daughter, who turned 8 and got the unicycle, turned 19 last week. So we've been at this for a minute, for 11 years. So we have a unicycle library. So if someone's interested, we just loan them a unicycle for a while. It takes about 14 hours to learn to unicycle. It's more about persistence than any balance. And so, yeah, so our kids usually do a routine at like big basketball tournament games or whatever at halftime. So actually, that's what I was doing last night, was watching my kids do a unicycle halftime show at the basketball district game. So
that's amazing. When people say, give us a fun fact about you, is that your fun fact?
It's frequently a fun fact. It feels easy, doesn't it?
I
think there's other.
It feels fun.
It feels fun. Yeah.
So, I mean,
it's
a qualifying factor, right?
Right. Yeah. And I personally don't unicycle a lot. I always say we usually go to this town that has a St. Patrick's Day parade. And it's for sure my one time a year I unicycle. So I always have to relearn how to unicycle on cobblestone uphill real quick. And that's coming right up for St. Patrick's Day at the time of this recording. But it's been an interesting time. We even had an exchange student from Germany. So in Europe, it's a little more common. We even had an exchange student who she literally looked more comfortable on a unicycle than she did on her legs. It was hilarious.
Gents,
she was from
listening,
Germany.
You heard it here first.
It's a pickup tool.
Unicycling and attractive go hand in hand.
Yeah.
Let's get it going. Yeah.
I love
it's a great activity.
It sounds amazing. I've never tried it. I love that you added that in your bio, though, and I was absolutely not just going to let that slide. Like, I was like, we got to talk about this because she put it in there and we need to go. But today's episode, despite the last 2 minutes of our conversation, is not actually about unicycling. We are talking about eczema. And what a topic. Okay, How many people are the folks that are impacted by eczema? I know our kids have dealt with it at a time. I know I have friends who have kids who have dealt with it. I know I have adult friends who deal with it themselves. So let's get in there. I would love to hear first, what is eczema? Can you define it for us?
Sure. It's also called dermatitis, atopic dermatitis, and it's just essentially skin inflammation. And there's many types of eczema. I think this is where we kind of go wrong, as we treat it all about the same. But essentially, some things that we can agree on unanimously worldwide is that there's usually a staph aureus, a particular bacterial overgrowth at play. So there's actually many skin conditions, but I would say the main ones, right, are psoriasis, eczema, and acne that most people are familiar with. But eczema is going to look a little different places. Psoriasis is going to have almost a plaque-like thing, and usually they're going to figure that out via biopsy. I think there's overlap for sure. I think it's just a matter of what things work best for what kind of presentation. Sometimes I don't care about the name as much as how it's behaving, but it's just skin inflammation, and the only thing we totally agree about is staph overgrowth for the most part with eczema.
Mm-hmm.
So it can look like a red irritation, it can look dry and flaky, it can pretty much show up anywhere on the body, from the scalp, from cradle cap could be considered, in my mind, a type of eczema. There's nummular eczema, which is kind of a round, like nickel-sized shapes all over. There are like several that I actually don't pay attention to anymore because the names aren't as important. When I'm asking someone about eczema, I'm usually asking them about when did it first appear, how does it behave, what does it look like, because how those things respond help you narrow or guide how you should address it or treat it more so. And so, of course, the problem is that our toolbox is very often steroids. There are some drugs coming out for eczema. Obviously, my clients aren't looking for those, right? That's where like this dramatic thing happens, where people are using a steroid or they don't want to use the steroid, understandably. And then their next option, if they're not having success, is that they have to go to this very expensive biologic drug. And for sure, there's more of them on the market now. So not that that's what you asked, Liz, but when we're thinking about eczema, one of our annoyances, right, if you've dealt with it as well, is like, oh, you'd think that would just be really simple, but unfortunately it's just kind of like, it's like seeing the tip of the iceberg sticking out of the water, right? And it's like, what's going on underneath the iceberg? So.
No, I love that answer. Is the staph overgrowth on just the surface of the skin, or is it happening deeper within the body?
Every single stool test I run on every single eczema client has overgrowth of staph and strep in the gut. So I know that it is overgrown from the inside out. And so that's kind of the first question. And I'll tell you a little pearl that I think is so useful. And there's something about having a condition yourself. I really didn't choose to talk about eczema all the time, right? Because it's kind of like it's like acne or weight loss. It's like the weight loss of the skin world, right? Where it's like you can have other stuff going on, but until it affects how you look, you don't care, right? And that's not true for everyone, but I'm just saying we're humans. So we're motivated by vanity typically. So every single one of them is overgrowth from the inside out typically. Or I always see a staph and strep overgrowth from the inside out. It just depends on what else is going on also. So I don't know. That's just one way to, it's pretty cool. The tidbit I was going to tell you, I lost track of my train of thought there, which was illness. If people get sick or they get like just a common cold, you can have an eczema spot pop up either at that time or up to 3 weeks later. Because if you think about it, illness is like more of an infection, right? You have that sinus infection, you have that strep, right? Or whatnot. And so I have this dumb analogy where, it's like you have a gymnasium with all these different colors of balls, right? And we're trying to get the balls kind of out or just have like the good ones in there. We have all these red or bad balls that pop up during illness. Well, after illness, they go down, but they're still a little overgrown, right? And so that's why you'll start to see, if skin's grown from the inside out, that's why it's up to 3 weeks later, you'll start to see this flare or a little bit of skin presentation after illness. So really common place to look for it. There's just a little bit of overgrowth presenting on the skin at that time. So good to keep in mind, especially if you have kids, because you don't think about the cold from 3 weeks ago causing an eczema flare. If you have the predisposition to have a skin issue, I would say.
Yeah, the predisposition to have a skin issue. Did you immediately think of one of our children? Don't say who, though.
We have a kid that is
Don't call her out.
Has a predisposition.
We have 3 daughters.
For having a skin thing.
I feel like all of her issues were like, it's always skin. She's like the one that dealt with impetigo. She's the one that will like get the weird rash. She'll like cut her finger and it will get infected, weirdly enough. And I'm like, what is happening to you? So talk to me. What does it mean to have a predisposition to have a skin thing?
The first thing I'm looking at is the family history. So I never think, we're going to blame something on genetics, right? Genetics are just the example is they load the gun and what's actually happening is pulling the trigger, right? So usually I'm going to ask you, and especially if they're like kids, when was the first time something happened? Or this is pretty convenient. I've got 2 parents here. So the first question is, did any of you suffer from anything in the atopic march, which is eczema, allergies, or asthma at any time of your life?
Mm-mm.
No.
Awesome.
I did have some sports asthma when I was in college that I remember having to deal with.
Interesting. And then as you became an adult, it just nothing.
I haven't dealt with it since.
I also feel like that's because he was inhaling the toxins from the turf. You know what I'm saying? I
Yeah,
feel like the
very
field
possible.
turf, that's a
Totally.
real thing. He was
Totally.
getting these bad coughs after games. So I don't know that was, anyways, yeah.
Yeah, right. There's a lot of asthma that's induced by whatever that biotoxin is or whatnot. Okay, so then if neither parent does, which depending on how it starts or presents as a kid, usually a parent does have one of those in the history because that's just going to be a genetic predisposition. So I'll talk more about some genes that can impact that. We can talk about that. Like for me, I never really thought about this, but my dad was had pretty significant seasonal allergies, but never talked about it. Never really thought about it. So then you might want to look at your siblings. Did they have anything? Or even your parents, did they have anything? So those are the first kind of predispositions. What is the genetic predisposition? And so when I say that, I always think of genes as kind of a light switch. Genes tell you how fast the enzyme is going to operate, and every single thing that happens in the body is controlled by enzymes. And enzymes are going to depend a lot, and the enzymes are then going to depend a lot by nutrients, nutrient cofactors if you have those, and then also what else is going on in the lifestyle. So if you have slow genes for something, and again, I don't think the answer here is you need to go run out and get a genetic test. I think you just look at your family history and say, so my family history is my dad's got a little bit of allergy history, lots of that. Like my sisters in high school had the same kind of flaky skin on their hairline, and I was like, oh, it must be genetic, right? And I have lots of aunts and uncles with other kinds of significant health concerns, which if you start to kind of look at health concerns and all the common denominators, well, of course, I have crappy liver genetics. So I actually did have my genetics tested, and so many of my genes related to my liver were just not speedy. So there's kind of runs at normal operation. The green ones, yellow is a little bit slower, and then red is double slow, right? So everyone's turned on a light switch that has taken a couple seconds to go, right? So if those genes are slow, then a process wouldn't work as well. So I'll tell you about a very, very, very common process that happens with most eczema, especially most kids with eczema, and they are affected much more than adults, as you probably know, right? 10 to 20% of kids. I think it's 5% of adults is, I don't know, the stats I saw last, but I don't know how skewed that is. My brain skews it a lot because I see those people, right? So with most eczema in some capacity, but especially kids, there's a histamine component. Have you ever talked about histamine here much?
We have, but we've never done a good job defining it and really talking about what that is. So if you want to go into that, do that.
Yeah, sure. So histamine is a natural neurotransmitter. It's a natural chemical messenger your body makes. It gets upregulated with activity. So if you're running around, people will be running around and then they have more redness afterwards. Hot showers, right? People will see the upregulation of the skin stuff post a hot bath or hot shower. The environment, everyone's experienced that with allergy season, right? There are certain allergens or things for certain people that upregulate that histamine load. And then there are foods that are just naturally higher in histamine. And again, the end point here is not to eliminate these things. My goal is to process the histamine better, right? Because your genes aren't your destiny. So genetically, there's a couple genes that influence how the histamine degrades. So normal, and this is just how it normally is, DAO and HNMT naturally help break down histamine, and then your liver helps shuttle it out. This is actually pretty much how everything works in your body, right? You have estrogen metabolism, right? People have heavy periods, and by the way, you will see in adult women for sure, or teenage women or whatever, you will see sometimes ovulation and menstruation, flaring skin. There's all common denominators here. It's very similar. Estrogen has all these things, all these enzymes that help break it down, and then really similar processes taking out the extra trash. So with histamine, it's this natural chemical messenger. We're going to have it no matter what. We're going to have all these things that upregulate it. It's not bad. It's just a matter of how well we're processing it out. So if there's something going on in the gut in some capacity, it's going to interfere with enzyme metabolism. And then that's going to slow down overall. And then when we're thinking about detoxification and drainage, of course, the skin is a drainage organ, or a detox. It's just a safe place. This is probably why we see skin issues so much in children, or eczema so much in children, is there's a lot of talk. And again, this isn't, I just feel like this is so practical and realistic. We don't live in a perfect society, right? And so we have loads of toxic burden, right? And so it needs a safe place to go if the body's not getting rid of it in one of its other emunctory functions, right? Like pooping or peeing, right? It's going to show up on the skin. So histamine or slow enzymes around histamine can be a factor in eczema. And then also there's tons of nutrients and genes that impact how you are influencing drainage and detoxification, right? So if you want to talk about detoxification a little bit, so yeah, that's histamine. And so we're all familiar with it from a perspective of antihistamines, right? That kind of block histamine. And then there's, of course, also like a variety of herbs and things that can help you modulate histamine. There's other life things that happen, mold exposure, for example, which, again, not being crazy, just being like, well, it's a little more common than you think, right? That can really upregulate histamine for people, especially if people are having adult onset allergies or something out of nowhere. Or like you, Joey, if you had told me, if Liz hadn't chimed in with some possibilities of that sports induced asthma, it's kind of like, and if it wasn't sports induced, you just in college for the years you lived in a certain college house suddenly had asthma, we'd be like, I wonder why that would happen, right? We would just look for opportunities, and it's just putting little pieces together, right? So histamine and genetic predisposition. So first, looking at your own like family history, what was going on with my siblings, what's going on. We don't blame it. We just look at, there might be a little bit of a slow light switch or multiples here that allow for this to happen. So for me, I have all those slow light switches. So I have a predisposition tendency toward dry skin. Literally, there's a gene that converts the plant-based fatty acids into the animal-based fatty acids. ALA is the plant-based fatty acids. Omega-3s you might get from like chia seeds and things. And then your liver needs to convert that into EPA and DHA, which is what your cells actually use as part of your cell coating. And so if you think about it, every little cell has a little layer, and every little cell makes up tissue. And so if they're all kind of dry and they don't have the little things working, you don't have all the processes working to make a nice little phospholipid layer, then you're gonna have dry skin. So I have that. My youngest son has that. My middle child, absolutely. That definitely skipped over her. She never deals with dryness. But the antidote to that was that I really have to be taking in animal-based omega-3s. Otherwise, I'm not filling my own bucket of need for omega-3s, to be honest. And there's not many places to get it in the animal universe. It's a lot of fatty fish, to be honest. Like there's just not a lot of options. The thing that's going to give you the animal-based EPA and DHA, the kind that you actually need, it's got to have a liver, so it's got to be an animal that can convert it itself. So anyway,
that's so interesting. It has to have a liver to convert. Yeah, that's so interesting.
Well, it's kind of like, you remember that, I don't know if you recall this, they used to put like low cholesterol peanut butter on things like way back when. It was like, this is such a stupid label because peanuts they don't have a liver to metabolize that, right? So it was like dumb labeling.
Oh, it was like putting, like a gluten-free thing on rice or something. It's like just a little added.
Yeah,
you know
just
what I'm
a
saying?
Little added label.
Little marketing.
Cholesterol free.
Okay, that's interesting though. I like how you said look to your family history, not to just like blame them hard stop, but to have a broader picture for maybe what might be going on in your body. And then it doesn't always absolutely translate. Like you said, your middle doesn't have those same skin expressions. I want to get into, and you touched on it a little bit, but it's fascinating to me that the staph and the strep infection are coming up positive in your stool samples for these kids with eczema. And I've always heard that, your skin is kind of the last place for your body to kind of show what's going on, maybe what's disrupted inside. And I want to know what these parents are facing when they're going to their doctor and saying like, hey, what do I do? What's like standard traditional, like, I have eczema, what do I do? What are these parents being prescribed?
Steroids. And the thing about steroids is the standard of care around steroids is that there is supposed to be a titration off period. It is supposed to be a short-term plan. And steroids, which I really like, one of my philosophies is that there's no shame and you just do your best with what you're doing. But if someone comes off steroids and they're just flaring, well, you're missing the point, because steroids are kind of like taking the batteries out of the fire alarm. So I think they're really good if you need to sleep overnight. I think that's a really good time to use it. Or if you're a parent and like you've got a kid with stuff going on. So usually steroids are the main thing, unfortunately. If they're fortunate, and here's some really great tools if you're at the derm. You can ask for a skin culture. You can ask for them to staff, or a swab for staph. It's not always going to be positive. The tests are always imperfect. So if your mom gut feeling feels like, man, this seems staffy when I look at pictures, because if it's like oozing and red and super angry, I always have people send me pictures of what things look like, because our interpretation is so subjective, of course, right? And so when I see a picture, I'm like, oh, pretty angry. And if there is a fire on top of the skin, like there's a raging staph infection, like it's super angry, I just want them to put that infection out so they can get some relief, because that baby's probably like so sad, crying, so uncomfortable. And sometimes you'd be surprised at how often that's missed, and how often when you talk about that in a podcast, someone will reach out to you and say, thank you for that. That actually was like a really big deal. We took our kid and had a staph culture. So you can kind of push. You need to be, I think always when you're not getting success with your clinician, it's always good to have like some back pocket things to use. So one, can you test for the staph infection? According to integrative dermatologists that I have interviewed, they say that the fungal cultures, topical cultures, are not super accurate. So just a side note, because I've encountered that myself. And I don't have a super big dog in that fight. For me, if there's a fungal exacerbation, so we talked about staph and strep overgrowth, but by the way, there's a lot of other imbalances that can be going on if you want to talk about those. So fungal stuff will have a pattern to it and it'll look fungal. And there's a little different approach to fungal stuff than bacteria. And you can assume that there's often both, to be honest, right? But I will just mention, if the staph culture is negative, don't despair. It's okay. And you can still ask for a topical low-dose antibiotic. And if it works, well, you're probably onto something, right? You're probably onto something. So that can give you some quick relief, because it's so painful, right? As a parent, you want to take away your child's pain if they're in a lot of pain, of course, right? So those are typically the things you're getting offered at the provider. It really depends on the provider, but I would say that's largely what the toolbox is. It's not super deep. Now, sometimes there will be an interaction and you'll get referred to allergy. And I think that that's an okay place to be referred to as well. And you may get allergy testing. Sometimes people really struggle to get that done. They don't have a supportive care team. Sometimes they do. So love if they do. And so the research reviews I've done is that skin testing for environmental allergens, blood testing for food-based allergens, that's going to change, age 3 to 5 as well, right? As long as the immune system and the gut are developing, all of that can change, honestly, even though they're supposed to be permanent. With kids, we know they're not permanent. And if adults end up with these, all of a sudden, we know that there is a little bit of variable here. But usually we view allergies or IgE reactions as being more so permanent. So I think that's good, especially if there's a pet allergy. I think that one has been really tricky for me over the years with people that have a known dog allergy and then they have a dog in the house. Really tough. Really tough to succeed, to be perfectly honest there, because it's like there's just constant inflammation going on. Now, I always tell people, like, you're never out of options. There are allergy treatment. There are alternative and integrative allergy treatment things. Like, I'm not an expert in these particular ones. My approach to allergies in small children is to influence gut microbiota and immune system. And there's a lot of influence and there's a lot of information going to the immune system from detox and drainage support, etc. But there's other alternatives like the NATE protocol, right? Natural allergy elimination technique. There's allergy drops, right? Even conventionally, the allergist may offer allergy shot type things, right? Which are kind of similar to some of these. I think of them as kind of similar to these like microdose or homeopathy type allergy type drops. So I don't know how we got there, Liz, but
No, that was great. I'm curious though, like when you go to the pediatrician or dermatologist or whoever you're talking to and they prescribe you steroids, are they giving you an explanation as to what might be causing the eczema, or are they just like eczema is the symptom and that's what we're treating it? Because they're obviously not doing a stool sample, right?
No, they're not doing a stool sample. If you're at your regular doctor, the only time that a stool sample is usually done or useful is if there is a very acute flare, like GI flare, like all of a sudden this kid starts having diarrhea for a week. Like that's when you'll catch something on that test. That's the sensitivity level it is. When I have like local friends that call me and say, this is what's going on, and I hear that it's just really fresh and only been going on for a few days, I say, you should go to the doctor and see if that's Campylobacter, because like if you work with cattle or something, which is common where I live, that can be easily picked up. Now that said, when we're going to the derm, that's not happening, right? That is not happening. We don't have that same training. So I don't know if they're being educated on. I feel like parents tell me, and I mean, as a person with eczema, I went in, I got steroids. So one sucky thing about steroids is that they do thin the skin. I used to burn my chest with essential oils like 3 or 4 years in a row, about 10 years ago at least, because I'd forget that I used to use steroids in that spot, and I didn't even use them for that long. That's what sucks about that. I didn't even use them for very long in my brain. It was just for, I don't know, super intermittently, right? For maybe a couple of years, but very intermittently. Not like some people where this has been kind of their life, or they've always had a bottle of steroid ointment in their cabinet. But if you don't, as you know, if you don't get essential oils diluted enough, they can. But yeah, I would burn myself just in that one spot where it was like super thin from that history. So, I mean, when I'm talking to parents, I feel like they're probably not getting a lot of education. But that said, I don't see all the people that have amazing providers, right? Yeah, so I might be missing that piece. So I always want to play devil's advocate. I always think doctors want to provide really good care, most people. And I think anytime someone's had their own experience with those conditions, they can even provide sometimes better care. And then, of course, as we all know, sometimes their load is very, very full. So they don't really have the opportunity to educate you, or, they might be burned out. They may not be able to educate you to the fullest extent. So I always think we're the only person who cares about our health as much as we care about it more than anyone else. Yeah. Right. Yeah. So you've got to kind of be your own advocate, I would say. Totally. Always.
Quick recap for me. I apologize. My brain's moving slower than your guys' is. And so
it's Friday, Joey.
Hey,
I'm feeling it.
And y'all are real smart, and I'm over here like, I really want to know more about like this dry skin thing, and like we're talking about steroid uses, and so forgive me, and all the folks that are listening to this right now are like, what are you doing slowing this down? I just want to make sure I truly understand. We were talking about histamines at one point, and I don't want to derail the conversation. My only time I remember talking about histamines was with fermented foods.
Yes.
Why was that? Just quickly.
We were talking about it with Caitlin of Cultured Guru because, sorry, some people were frightened to consume fermented foods if they were not done anaerobically because it elicited a high histamine response for them.
So I guess the question is, what is a high histamine response?
A histamine response. Histamine symptoms look like anything you're familiar with allergies, but they don't always look just like that. It can also be skin inflammation or like red and raised skin. So this is actually, your question, Joey, is so useful because if you have a skin presentation style that is, so if you have an eczema that looks red and inflamed or kind of round and raised, there's probably a histamine piece at play for sure. Mm. If you have dry and flaky skin, that will send me down a slightly different, I would say it's like baking a cake, and it's like it just gets more layered. And so if there's dry and flaky skin, we can talk about what that can mean. And this is really, I think, my favorite part of the nuance is like, hey, it's trying to send you a message. Mm-hmm. Let's unravel the message that you can look. If you just understand some basic physiology, it's like, well, of course it looks like that. Mm-hmm. So your question was histamine response questions. Mm-hmm. So anything that looks like an allergy, sneezing, coughing, red, itchy eyes, all of those things, but also that red raised skin, etc. It can look, these are sneaky ones, it can look like anxiety and fatigue also. Now, there's about a zillion other things that cause those two symptoms also. So it's just, again, an overlap, right? It's an overlap for sure.
So fermented foods might be something that was going to cause a histamine response.
They'll upregulate histamine.
That was the discussion we were having.
That was the discussion we were having.
I guess the question I'm gonna pose now is, Christa, what are some things that can cause a histamine response? What should we be watching out for?
The environment, increasing exercise, hot water, and then there's a variety of foods. I didn't really talk about that, so I'll mention the foods, and I'll use a little story. When for a lot of my life before my massive eczema flare of 2015, I enjoyed tomatoes. I would eat tomatoes, but if the juice would run down my skin, it would be irritated, and I would itch for like 10 minutes. That was probably a histamine response.
Yeah.
So tomatoes will increase histamine. And I love all of these foods and I consume them all. But once upon a time, before my great eczema flare of 2015, my severe one, I used to think kombucha was like the best health food ever. And I made a lot of kombucha and it wasn't serving me in that time. So I think of like kefir as being a little, like if I was going to grade fermented foods, I would say like kefir, you are much more superior to kombucha. Yeah. Kombucha, you are like, I think you're really healthy, but actually you're not really supporting where my gut and my histamine degrading abilities and my detoxification burden are right now. In fact, I was just adding the fire. And so all of this, Joey, is quantity dependent. So just think of it like a bucket. The main thing is like what's filling the bucket, and when the bucket overflows, it's going to show up on your skin. So it's just like you can, when I actually, for my clients at this stage in the game, I really don't modify the histamines in their diet too often. But if I did, I would be looking for really simple wins. Instead of bananas and strawberries, very high histamine fruits, I'd be looking for berries and peaches, right? Simple, right? So it's not about restriction.
So banana.
Yeah, banana. So like if I get a parent and she's telling me, man, if you'd make it avocado or banana and they get all rashy, I'm like, yeah, it's histamine probably at that time. So you're just looking at how much they can tolerate at that time. And again, I really like, my goal is to enjoy all the foods, eat the birthday cake, love it all. I just want you, it's really a factor of how are you breaking it down and metabolizing it. And there's a bunch of fringe conversations of other food chemicals that are like this too, like oxalates, but histamines are the biggest one that most people struggle a ton with.
Is there a list or a place or a resource where folks could go to find almost like a tier list or a ranking of food items that may cause these histamine? Because, I mean, everyone I can think of wants to smash up a banana and an avocado and give it to their baby, right? And so just being aware of that, I think, would be helpful, especially if you start to see these things. Is there anything else, like any list people can go to?
Oh, well, there's probably lots because there's like no shortage of resources for this. There's not like one definitive place I would send you for this. I'm just thinking, I'm running through a catalog in my brain. I probably have a list on my blog. There are, but it's like if you Googled high histamine foods, you could feel okay. But we can run through a list here too, which is, and these are just really common ones I see: avocado, banana, strawberry, pineapple, nuts, it's a tricky one, dairy, it's a tricky one for a while. Those are some of the biggest ones, I guess.
Right on. That's so good.
So I just look at what people are doing, and if they're doing like, if sometimes tomatoes, sometimes the diet is only histamines, just accidentally. Just love all the histamines. Yum. I also think of it, another way to think of it, Joey, is any fermented, aged, or dried food. So like a wine bar or a charcuterie board. That is like histamine city. Wine bar, charcuterie board. So beer and wine are full of histamine. Hard alcohol is not. So people with histamine issues, sometimes they're struggling, with more wine, beer stuff. Like all the salamis and whatnot. Yeah, anything on the charcuterie board, pretty much. Like any of that dried, aged, fermented stuff. So
and you were saying that your ability to withstand these histamine like foods, right, is different. And how did you define again how would you know if this is something that you're more capable of metabolizing or digesting versus someone that can't?
Yeah. So if you already have seasonal allergies, you have a little bit of an issue with a histamine issue, right? If you go to a wine bar and you eat the charcuterie board and you're like having nasal congestion, it's a little bit of a histamine thing. Now, here's the really good news. There's more than one approach to do everything. So it depends on what your bandwidth is. There are options for low bandwidth people and high bandwidth people. When I say that, Joey, I mean, okay, so I see that I have a little bit of a problem, but it's not really affecting my life enough where I care too much. So a couple options in the, hey, this is great for you, is they could take an antihistamine. That's an option. And there are things for like wine, etc., like molybdenum. There's like little things that can help that process better. Next layer, if someone's dealing with more of this and it's like, well, I don't really enjoy this, I don't really want to take an antihistamine, are there natural antihistamines? Yes, there are. There are all kinds of herbal antihistamines. There is a product, I think it's dehist. And so I like to teach people ingredients. So quercetin and nettles are huge. Well, quercetin is more of a compound, but nettles are an herb, right? Maybe you're familiar with nettles. Super nutrient and mineral rich too. Those have some natural antihistamine properties. Bromelain, which is also an enzyme, can help. So there's a product called dehist, and so when you think about a medicine, like a medication or an over-the-counter, you think about like one pill and it working hardcore, and that's how antihistamines work, right? It's like one pill works for 24 hours typically. With like dehist, you have to build that up in the system. So you need to take actually a loading dose for a week. So if you just like try to take it after the wine bar, like it's probably not going to work. That's kind of actually the answer with most natural products, is it's probably going to take a little bit more and take a little bit longer actually, because you're trying to maybe change things at a different level. So we're not just trying to block histamine, we're trying to improve modulation, ability to process and work it through. So those herbs are improving your ability to process that potentially, okay? So there's a bunch of products named aller whatever in the natural health space that might be useful, but quercetin, bromelain, nettles, some ones for sinuses would be like tinospora, Indian tinospora. So those are some of the ingredients I tend to look for. Hesperidin, you'll see those repeated. Even like sometimes high dose vitamin C you'll see in some of those. And those, again, you're going to just want to take more routinely throughout that season where you struggle with it. If the histamine burden is up, you want to take those during that time. And then my approach is more like the deep one, where it's like, if this is kind of routinely being a problem, which again, with we're talking about eczema. So allergies our goal with allergies is to try to reduce the severity, right? If you improve what's going on in the gut and the immune system, we're trying to improve how all that stuff is processed, Joy, like all the histamine processing, because it's really like gut liver, right? That's the bottom line. It's gut liver stuff. And so I'm impacting what's going on in the gut and liver because I want to influence all of that other stuff up or downstream. So there's a level for everybody.
This is so good. No, this is so good. I'm so glad that I tried to kind of go back and learn.
No, it's good.
The really next thing was the cells. We were talking about processing cells, and there would be some like, man, if they weren't totally squared away, then I'm going to have dry skin. Because I even like wrote down in my notes like dandruff and people that maybe it's not necessarily like you were saying defining eczema is maybe challenging. I'm guessing things like scalp dandruff, and you said like cradle cap. Yeah, that kind of stuff. Is that all kind of like tied into this? And you were saying that metabolizing things that have a liver can help you. It was there was like fatty fish was what we were looking for, right? So I'm looking for more practical understanding of the cells that are going on there, so I know how to go back into my life and identify during like the really cold winter seasons when I might be struggling with dandruff what I can do.
All right. I want to talk about these from two aspects. So the second aspect I'll go off on because there's the physiology, and I'll try to use different analogies and you tell me if it's landing. And thank you for this, by the way. So we'll talk about how I almost never use lotion in the second example, because if I see my skin dry, I'm like, oh, I need to hydrate from the inside. So I'll talk to you about what that looks like. How do I support myself? That's literally like my very attuned response to my fatty acids are low. I should probably really support that. So I'll come back to that one. Joy. It is it's a cool thing. It's one of those really subjective things. You don't realize how reliant people are on their bottle of lotion. And I'm over here so lazy. I'm like, I don't even want to use lotion. I want to address what's going on the inside. So my skin is not dry.
It's like lotions, like moisturizers, face serums.
Well,
conditioners.
Women will continue to use their face serums, probably.
I think there's so many things. Anyways, continue.
Let her go because I want to hear this.
That's okay. Okay, so your first question was about cradle cap and dandruff. There is an extra layer to that. from your shoulders up is a more common strain of like a fungal strain called Malassezia. So like from here up, if you have stuff going on, it's usually got a little bit of a fungal component to it. Again, not always, Joey, but you want to kind of look for other fungal symptoms as well. So let's talk about other fungal symptoms for a second, because that could be useful. And I want to tell you that fungal stuff, fungal signs, like even on our stool test, it's not even, you don't always see it there, because that would be assuming that the fungus is just showing up in the stool. It might be hiding in your sinuses. It might be hiding in your vaginal microbiome. It might be presenting as athlete's foot. We all have a bacterial ecosystem, our microbiome, and we all have a fungal ecosystem, our mycobiome. It's just a matter of it's out of balance. Okay, so that's one way to think of it. So if the fungus is out of balance or overgrown, you might have white-coated tongue. You might be like ragingly craving sugar, or it might worsen all symptoms with a lot of sugar. That could happen with bacteria too. But so white-coated tongue, athlete's foot, toenail fungus, vaginal infection history. Those are some of the huge ones, but cradle cap dandruff also I would put in there. So if that's going on, I would ask, and that's not the only cause, by the way, right? There could be some nutrient deficiencies, and like you said, there could just be some dryness. And when we're thinking about dandruff, especially as adults, if that has come and gone, and especially if it's coming in the winter, then let's go to the dry skin conversation. And let's also consider how much our hard water might even be playing a role in it, to be perfectly honest. So there's some nuance. And then so all of this is good. Some people are like, oh man, so many things. I'm like, well, sometimes you learn through the experience. Like for me, I just learned in the last year or two how severely hard my water was, and how it was absolutely negatively impacting my health in these very tricky, very sneaky ways. Like it was impacting my thyroid health. It was crazy because the calcium was just getting stuck and impairing that whole process. So it wasn't a bad thing. It was just like, I want to feel really good, and I don't want to have relapsing issues, and having a sluggish thyroid looks like that. So on to Joey's next question, which is, hey, I got some dryness. If I've got dryness in the winter, what is this telling me? So I love asking people, like, do you resonate with having dry skin? Maybe I should just put a little bit of a tail on, I was just like loosely mentioning the thyroid. I always think like there's all these organ systems you could just love on. They don't have to have labs going off about them. Like I've never had a thyroid blood test that was off, but I've had major sluggish thyroid symptoms. So did you know there's all these things I could do to be loving of it? And one of the places your thyroid hormone is metabolized is through the liver. So some symptoms of thyroid, like a sluggish thyroid, include dry skin and brittle hair. But what I want you to hear is that part of thyroid metabolism happens to the liver. So let's talk about what the point of the liver is, Joey, and why this applies to whether you care about having dry skin. Your liver, if we have to it does all these cool things. I always think about it like a factory. It does all these cool things, but if I have to summarize like one sentence of what it does, it's one of its main jobs is to produce bile, and then the gallbladder will store bile. And if you don't have a gallbladder, then your liver is just going to be responsible for everything. There's no bank for storing the money when the liver makes the money, right? So the bile is, your body has these really cool things built in to like protect you. So bile has like a zillion cool benefits where it helps control microbe growth, etc., right? Just all these cool things. But we're probably more familiar with it for its ability to break down fats. So fats are beneficial. Let's get clear on that, right? Like high quality fats are beneficial. You're supposed to consume them, and your body's supposed to break them down using bile. And then your body is going to use those to go make the cell membranes on the cells and help transport fat soluble vitamins like A, D, E, and K, right? So if you struggle, like I have this little thing that struggles to, there's actually multiple reasons that there could be a struggle. You could have crappy bile production and crappy fatty acid digestion. That would be a main one. So if that's on the struggle bus for some reason, which if your liver is feeling a little tired and sad, like it doesn't have enough workers, and it just takes a lot of nutrients for it to work, that's the main thing there, it may not be producing it very efficiently. So that's very possible. Stress will also suppress this. Cool, right? So we want to, and this is not crazy, and again, lab-wise, like blood lab-wise, usually it's going to look pretty bad before it shows up there, unfortunately. So if you just think about the basic physiology, your liver makes bile breaks down fatty acids to move around nutrients and make up cell membranes as one huge thing. They also help make the backbone of hormones, etc. If you know that and you think about every cell needing this cell membrane, then all those little cells make up tissue, and now you have this lovely tissue that's not all dry. But if it's all dried up and doesn't have nice fatty acids, it's going to be like Las Vegas in July, right? And like it's hard to get nutrients into the cell when it's like that if you don't have nice cell membrane layers. So this is a topic I talk about a lot because we talk a lot about mineral stuff, etc., with clients also. Sometimes that dryness can also relate to just in general having low minerals, because those minerals are impact how the liver is making the bile also. Like it's all pretty interplayed. So the minerals affect enzymes. But simply, if your skin is dry, look to the liver, because the liver makes the stuff that breaks down the fatty acids that makes up the cell membranes. And guess what? Inflammation uses up the omega-3s. That's our body. If it's got some alarm going off, right? You stub your toe or whatever, or a commonplace inflammation comes in that's intentional is working out. You break down muscle tissue, build it up, lots of inflammation. So you need to be able to put in support there. So to your point, Joy, if my skin is dry, and I already know I struggle with like making omega-3s, the type that my body wants to absorb, the animal-based kind. If my skin is looking dry, I'm like, I should go ahead and use this as a sign to support my omega-3s. And I could eat a bunch of salmon and black cod, or the only real plant-based version is algae, because it's kind of like a organism, a living organism. But I'm also going to take like really high dose omega-3 for about 2 weeks. And this is the next thing. People are like, I did that. I'm like, did you take 500 milligrams? Because that's like nothing. And that's what most tablets are. So if you take like one capsule of something, I like to see results. So I like to do effective doses. And most people don't realize that you could do like 3,000 or 4,000 milligrams of omega-3s, which is kind of expensive, but I just do it for a couple of weeks, get things looking good, move on with my life. It's a fun
3,000 or 4,000 milligrams like per day?
Yep. Of omega-3s for at least 2 weeks. Yep. And then look at that after 2 weeks and see if you have a reduction in the dryness. Now, remember, anything that's more severe might take another dose, honestly. So
this is so outstanding.
I choose capsules that are 1,000 milligrams each. That way I only have to take like 3 or 4. 5 instead of 6 or 8, right? Okay. So because humans don't like that, right? We're like, take 6 of something, right? So it makes it hard for us to take what would be a really effective dose, just because our brain doesn't think that we should have to take 6 of something, right? But unfortunately, most food-based ingredients are actually quite large. Like there's a lot of examples of this. Choline is a really great nutrient. It's not in a lot of prenatals because it's so damn big, in the nutrient form. Whole food vitamin C is so freaking big, right? Whereas ascorbic acid, which is a isolate, kind of just very small, right? So those omega-3s, they're just big. They're just big.
So chronic dry skin could potentially be liver, meaning like it's either bile production, meaning like nutrient deficiencies, or it could be that you're not bringing in enough fatty acids that the bile can process to turn into that like healthy cell membrane for, kind of replenishing the skin's hydration. I don't know. Yeah. That's the way I'm going to interpret that.
Yeah.
And one of the ways you can combat that is through, I think you said, nutrient dense foods to kind of support that bile creation, or through the fatty acids and omega-3s. And you said 2 weeks is probably a good time frame to get some results and to kind of learn whether or not this is what you need to be doing, I'm guessing.
Yeah, if you're taking an efficacious dose, meaning like 4,000 milligrams.
So being effective is important.
Yeah, and that's the thing, is like there's a lot of things people do that they're not doing an effective dose. Like if you do something once, like cool, that's not an effective dose. I apply this to a few other places. I apply this concept of efficacious doses like sauna use, Epsom salt baths. Like you can absorb all this magnesium topically in an Epsom salt bath, but if you do it like once a month, good luck. It might feel good, but like it's not really going to be enough. So I always tell people, can you do it 2 to 4 times per week for 2 weeks? Because then if you could commit to that amount, you're probably going to see you're probably going to be like, I actually feel a little bit better. There's a lot of processes when that's depleted. So like to your point, Joey, I was saying, Like minerals can be an important piece. If you look up, like there's a bunch of nutrients the liver needs. It's like a factory, right? So there's all these workers. There's a bunch of nutrients. And so when we're talking about nutrient-dense foods, yeah, you can ingest nutrient-dense foods, but you have to be able to digest them. And I always joke, like, you should put this on my headstone. I don't think anyone was digesting. No one was digesting. They were just eating. They were just inhaling their food and moving on with the day. And digestion's a lot more than that. Like, you got to be in rest and digest state. You got to chew it up, right? Like, your stomach doesn't have any teeth. So, there's just a few accidental cracks where things can slip through. And then it's like, oh, I think I'm doing that. And it's like, I see the problem here, right? So anyway, I don't know if that helps.
That's a great point, especially for parents with kids and they want to help treat something and they feel like, I gave it a week and I'm not seeing a result. It might need more time.
Usually takes 3 weeks to see results for pretty much everything.
Yeah.
I'm like a weirdo and I like to observe cause and effect of everything. And I've got like great sample sizes of my clients. And I'll tell you what, like everything you do, give it 3 weeks. You don't have to give it 6 or 8 weeks. So our human tendency, and this happens with food restriction. People will restrict a diet and they will maybe see a benefit and then they will just keep doing it. And eventually that doesn't work. Right? Eventually that doesn't work. Because if we're extremely restrictive, we're also restricting food groups and nutrients. And if we're restricting foods and we're seeing a benefit, it's really a digestion issue, to be perfectly honest, because it's the undigested stuff. It's the foods not being digested. It's the histamines not being digested, right?
Yeah.
It's the carbs not being digested well, feeding the process that's not working properly. There's some process under the iceberg surface that's probably not working. And I don't want you to be restricting foods from your kid if you don't need to. It sucks. That's like, that's not how we win the world.
That's a great point. Before we move on from this whole omega-3 situation, I want to know your take on cod liver oil. And then for omega-3s, like, where are we sourcing these from? Where are they derived from? What's a good place to get them? Let us know.
Yeah. Years ago, there was this always happens, like there's hubbub around, hey, this nutrient was causing issues. And I remember, I think omega-3s got some bad press once upon a time, a long time ago. And a lot of times when you see that, there will be a really crappy source, right? It'll be like some big box store or something or other. So unfortunately, the answer to whether it's a good product is always going to depend on that individual company. And are they operating ethically and in integrity? Are they doing third-party testing? So the main thing about fats and fatty acids is that they can oxidize and become not stable and good and become inflammatory technically. Like if we overcook olive oil, it'll do that. I don't stress about this personally. If I know I'm going to be cooking something at higher heat, I'll grab my avocado oil, right? Like it's a higher heat point. If I don't remember, I will live till tomorrow. It will be fine. Like anytime, I want to remind us that things that increase stress usually work against us always. So, okay, so omega-3s, quality. So quality does matter. I mean, we could totally name drop, but you can there's some extremely reputable companies. For me, it's easy because I'll use clinical ones, right? And I'll use ones that just work. Something you should know about supplements is a lot of supplements they are sourcing from similar places. Like I don't know the whole spectrum of the omega-3 industry. Probably wouldn't be that hard to find out, to be perfectly honest. But there's a different ingredient that I love for immune health, and all of the supplement companies source it from the exact same lab in Iowa. So it's kind of funny, right? So you can see where this is being sourced from. Like one of the companies I use will say, like, we're sourcing it from Nordic waters and blah, 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 blah. Like they will give you all that information. A great company will usually be forthcoming about their sourcing, their testing, their quality standards, right? And then making this more palatable also, like I shouldn't be burping up fish like terrible if it's a high quality one. I'm not saying you might not initially too. If your liver is sad and burdened and needs a lot of love and support to make more bile, you taking that many omega-3s could give you some fish burps. Like maybe you're not even, maybe it's going to be hard to even digest that. Okay. So that's there's not super easy answer to which brand is the best or how to know. Like, that's why we find brands we develop a trust and relationship with, and then we order from them, because that's what it boils down to. It's just ethics. It's brand ethics, right? Kind of like either one of our brands as well. It's like, are you doing an ethical job and integrity?
Totally.
And what kind of testing? So that's the only easy way to know that. And then and I would say it's important for fatty acids because they can be unstable. There's certain nutrients that certainly can be unstable. And there's a lot of brands that are just very high quality too, right? So, you can always start with just any professional brand, and you can just see go into some practitioner you trust office and like, what do they have on their shelf? It's a really great place to start. Why do they have that? Like one of my good friends, she's an optometrist, and she carries a couple different brands because she's done before and after testing. There's a small company in my state called Omega Quant, and you can do a finger prick test, and it'll show you where your omega-3 status is. And then they'll even like give you a consult to help you tell you how much you should take. And I know the people who own that company, and they're lovely people. But it's like simple, easy to kind of figure out if someone's just really not sure, and this comes into play. I mean, omegas are super beneficial. There's some really cool other what's really great about nutrients is like, we're talking about them for dry skin, but also they are awesome for a million other things. So like, for example, I learned from that company that if you're a DHA, so a type of omega-3, is great during pregnancy, no stress, you don't need a supplement. If it's low, it's like associated with preterm birth, So it's like, wouldn't that be cool if we just tested our omega-3 levels in pregnant moms and then reduced NICU stays across the US? Like,
yeah.
Wouldn't that be dreamy? Wow. I wonder how much freaking medical dollars we could save. So it's like amazing. Sometimes the stuff you'll learn, you're just like, wow, so simple and easy, yet will not be applied at this moment in time. Okay. I get on tangents. I'm sorry, Joey. And this Friday.
This is amazing.
All right, great. So we were talking about omega-3s and kind of sourcing there. And then how do you maybe even know if you need it? Again, I tend to always prioritize symptoms over testing, which is why I say, like, if you got dry skin, how's the phospholipid layer of every one of your cells? Isn't that a nerdy coffee conversation?
Right. Yeah.
But just how I think, as you like get to you just keep digging deeper and deeper. All right, cod liver oil is more of like a whole food structure. It's amazing. So it's part omega-3s, part great source of synergistic forms of vitamin A and D. There's something I've been wanting to do for a while, so let me know if you have feelings about this too, Liz. But something I've been wanting to do, because as I talk about this with clients, because I get asked the same question by clients, which is wonderful. So they both have a place, and there's not really a right or wrong answer, but the dose might need to be higher on the cod liver oil for what I'm recommending for the dry skin, and you're not going to hurt yourself with a food. So it's a food. You're not going to hurt yourself with cod liver oil, in my opinion. You could come at me about that because you'd be like, oh, really high vitamin A retinol is dangerous, blah, blah, blah. I'm like, oh, it's food-based.
Yeah.
It's going to be okay. It's going to be okay. Your body's going to know what to do with that, typically, right? We could always throw a caveat in there. So I'm really of the mindset that, nature made things perfectly, and they are putting vitamin A in a higher ratio than vitamin D, and we should probably be paying attention to that. So I do love cod liver oil, especially there's a bunch of like nutrient pattern stuff that I care about. So sometimes we'll intermittent or alternate was the right word there, between like cod liver oil and like plain omega-3s, and see if it depends on what our goal is. So I'm good either way. And what I was going to say was something I'm really interested about it as I discuss this with my clients. Every once in a while, someone will say like, oh, my mom used to give us that as kids, my grandma did. And I would just love to talk to some old ladies about, which I have access to many, so I need to just like send them send Mary B a text or whatever. Hey, did you guys take cod liver oil as kids? Because sometimes there's these ancient traditions that were there for a reason. So I'm really intrigued by that, because the kind of folklore around it is, and so if anyone is listening and wants to, just sample their people, it would be really cool to collate this. I'm just so curious, with that source of A and D, it was kind of like the winter thing, right? That you would dose the cod liver oil in the winter. So I don't know if you have any feelings or you've ever heard this as well.
I have heard that, and I've thought about it. And I know sometime after World War II or during World War II, like it became a recommendation to start dosing cod liver oil. And then somehow in the mix of the, 19 later, that got ditched. And so for some reason, probably around the 50s or 60s, I would assume, when the whole fat conundrum came about. But yeah, I think that it's always interesting when we ask people before us who maybe didn't have as much chronic illness or didn't have the same presentation of symptoms, what their lives look like. So, yeah.
Yeah, it's unfortunate we became fear. We do a terrible job of oversimplifying. I love to oversimplify, but sometimes we do a really stupid job of things. So, like, to Joey's point earlier when we're talking about the liver, it's like there was a time where all of a sudden it was like all fat is bad.
Yes.
That's not correct. Or that fat really negatively impacts cholesterol. That might be true with some fat in some ways, but overall, it's a quality issue and how well is your liver working, digesting it, processing it, etc. And it's more a topic of inflammation and how your body is coating those vessels. I actually have a kind of a pretty fringe episode about this coming out where this doctor relinquished his medical license because he was just like, I just keep asking questions and it just doesn't make, like, that's actually not what happens in the body. But here we've just accepted that, like, like this whole cholesterol heart myth thing. And it's like,
yes.
Yeah, it's, if you ask the right questions and you just dig deeper and deeper, sometimes you're like, that didn't make sense, did it? And this is why I would like to go back to physiology of like what we actually do know that the body does, right? If we do know that the body makes bile, the bile breaks down fat, the fat shuttles around fat-soluble nutrients and makes up phospholipid layers, well, then it would stand to reason that it would play a role in dry skin. Why not?
Totally.
Right. It's pretty cool.
I want to give maybe parents who have a child that struggles with eczema some sort of roadmap. So we know that there can be like internal overgrowth, and as you mentioned, potentially both fungal and bacterial. And you mentioned maybe a discrepancy in how our body can break down certain things or handle certain levels of histamine. But how can we give them practical tools to get to the root cause and understand what that might be for their child? And then like really seek out like soothing help, because I know a lot of kids who it's itchy and uncomfortable and they're not happy,
Yeah.
So what can we give those parents?
Yeah. And also, definitely experiment. So the first thing I always recommend, the hard thing when you're dealing with your kid is you're feeling kind of disempowered and helpless there. So let's just like try to set that aside to an extent. The other thing is you're not living in their body. So you might have more of a tolerance or something than your perception of their tolerance for it. And so my point of this is you have to start to document something, because if you have no idea what's going on, how could you help or have someone else look at it and help you, So I would definitely say, even if you just like used a calendar and make it easy, just look and see if there's any trends, any patterns, at least for a little bit. Like I would maybe commit to about 3 weeks again to look for patterns, because sometimes there will be patterns. Like sometimes you'll notice, man, this just really flares once a month, or I'm noticing it's flaring after he goes outside, blah, blah, blah. And then I'd also ask you to write the origin story down. I think this is so important. Usually it's very common for someone to come to me and be able to verbalize, my kid was born C-section, and then this happened, and this happened, and this happened. Cool. So their microbiome didn't totally get the seeding that maybe someone else's would, maybe. Or mom was positive for group B strep, so she was on antibiotics during her delivery period, so we lost some good bacteria, and so it's just easier for bad bacteria to set up shop in that case, right? So typically when you get when did the eczema start story, it makes sense. If it doesn't make sense, I'm a little suspicious. I feel like there might be some missing pieces to the story here. Okay. So writing down that origin story, or if you've been through the roller coaster, I hope you haven't been, but if you've had some ups and downs, or you've worked with something or someone or tried something and it wasn't helpful, great to write that down too, because what doesn't help can also be useful. Just be careful when it's like, I tried omega-3s. Okay, cool. Tell me about the dose. A lot of kid-based omega-3s have 100 milligrams per sugary little droplet dose. And we were talking about 3,000 milligrams before. Now, my son did great on 500, but 100 wasn't going to make a drop in the bucket, right?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so write that down so you have, I always think that there's like 3 stages. It's like assessment, intervention, reassessment, right? And give yourself a little break. I'm just trying to warn you, like if you just stay on something, like eventually you're going to have some fatigue. So you got to have a little bit of and again, it's hard to be your first project manager. But write it down, look at the onset, see what kind of makes sense based on this conversation, and then do some record keeping of like how it's kind of acting throughout the month. What things, hey, I fed my baby avocado and he flared right afterwards. Okay, write that down, right? That's really good information, because if I was going to look at that, I'd be like, it looks like they're reacting to histamine. I will tell you, not all, but the majority of kid cases are histamine stuff. Okay. All right. So we want eczema to be simple, but we got to keep in mind there's an internal and an external part. So there are topical things you can do. If there's a staph overgrowth, probably one of the coolest things on the market that is used in lots of different things. I remember my eye doctor friend gave me some resources, and for people with eye stuff, there was a really good product of hypochlorous acid, and it was like this really beneficial, gentle eye wash. Well, now all these companies are selling hypochlorous acid for wound care, for acne, for eczema, for whatever. It's friggin' awesome. It works great. It gets the skin and the pH that it should be, which is acidic, so that there's not bacterial overgrowth. Awesome. Like steroid, just suppressing the symptom, hypochlorous acid, addressing the topical microbiome. Super cool. Super cool. So there's stuff like that influences it differently. Sometimes we're just like, whoops, we're just slathering crap on it, and it's like there's not really a purpose. If you know that there's a potential bacteria, if we know that I just find, histamine, gut-mediated stuff, usually the problem with kids, right? So you have that topical approach, so you can do something like that. And that's usually what your tendency is going to be. Your tendency is going to be, what kind of topical stuff can I throw on this? When you're throwing topical stuff at it, stick to it for maybe a week at least. Okay, because if you are waking up in the middle of the night and just throwing whatever you have in the cabinet, and we've all been there, it's going to be really hard to see what's going on. Okay, so try to do like 1-ish thing per week if you're not really sure, and you just need to like separate the variables. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
If the skin is super angry topically, so I'm just going to talk about it from the topical angle for a moment. Skin's super angry, try to get a culture, try to put out the fire. Again, you may not need like a topical antibiotic. Maybe you can use something with hypochlorous acid and it can control it. I use it up to 4 times. I tell my people to use it up to 4 times a day. You'd be shocked at what it resolves. It's so cool. It's really cool. And it's really not expensive. My doctor friend, they make it in their office and use it as an antiseptic. That's what they use to like clean equipment.
Wow.
Super cool. Super cool. Probably just different dilutions. They all have all these different labels and look like they're indicated for different purposes. It's all like the same thing. So pretty cool. So I think that's a really good approach. And then again, having that list. Now, internally, go with the easiest answer first. The easiest answer first is to try to influence the microbiome positively. We all know that you could trial probably 2 or 3 types of probiotics, right? They're not all even. It's a whole different hour-long conversation. But there are some possibilities, right? It's not an end-all be-all. But if it's a simple thing, try it. See what happens. It doesn't hurt. There's other cool things too. I use a lot of colostrum and immunoglobulins with my clients also. Those can make a positive influence in the GI. There's all kinds of cool stuff that can make a positive influence. Start with something really supportive. Like, always be more supportive than aggravating. Think of it like that. So the skin's broken. There's a few categories of like topical, right? It's like a raging rash that's like inflamed and staffy, put out the staph. But if the skin's broken, ouch, everything's going to burn. Everything's going to burn. So you have got 2 goals then. Control, and then the staff's going to spread too. Because if you're itching from one place to another place, you're spreading it around. So just be careful with the spread of that. If the skin's broken open, you just have to be as careful as you can, try to heal the skin. Hand eczema has become an epidemic post-pandemic. I think putting alcohol in our hands over and over and over and like degrading our topical microbiome and our phospholipid layers and stripping away our natural oils was probably not beneficial, right? Really ripped that up. And so sometimes it's like slathering stuff on there and then putting gloves on overnight. I had a client who worked with patients, and we had a conversation kind of early on. I was like, I know this is so hard, but you can't keep hitting your hands with even like a nice, like you're probably just going to need to change gloves. So she did like cotton gloves, changed them a lot, and put gloves over the top of it and changed them. And you know what? That's fine in medical. Like, that's a great approach, because that way you're not just like continually stripping away. So just be so loving approach everything with love. Be just so loving to putting that skin barrier back together, because when it's broken open, like, you're farther down the spectrum of ouch, right? And that it's more challenging. So it'll just be harder to bring it back, right? You've got to heal the actual skin barrier. Okay. So roadmap, take inventory, assessment, do the history. And then I always think of things in an angle. If I'm oversimplifying, it's like, what can I do topically, externally, environmentally? What can I do nutritionally, chemically, whatever? What can I do emotionally, energetically? Okay. So we're just going to rework around that triangle. We've talked about it a little bit already. So environmentally, topically, we're trying to improve that topical skin microbiome, control any staph that's going on. The thing people always come to me already with is they've already changed their laundry detergent and their toxic burden. Good, do that. Get rid of some of those, like, that toxic burden stuff, because you know that the skin is essentially a safe place for your body to get rid of extra toxic burden, right? So clean up your environment and your personal care products. Always do that before you go somewhere else. That will cover a lot of, even for people with molluscum, like, you'll find that even doing that can be so darn beneficial. Okay. So clean that up. It's like a stepwise process, right? It doesn't need to be overwhelming. Just replace things as you can. The stuff I'm sure you guys talk about a lot here too, right? It's like, these are like become foundational for us, right? All that environmental stuff. And then check the topical skin barrier. So that's one corner, the environment, right? The structural stuff. And then nutritional chemical to me is, it's internal. So you could certainly influence with good bacteria. How are you digesting your food? Are you digesting well? You could do some enzymes in the interim, so you can help it digest, right? That's certainly helpful, because if you aren't digesting well, it'll look like you eat food and then you have a reaction. So you really want to improve digestion in any way possible. We know we all have, like, things we already understand that you can do in that area. Okay. And then what can you do to increase nutrients, right? Electrolytes, minerals, whatever. Just being really nutrient dense. So those are all, like, super simple little things you can do, right? I know they may seem big at once, but everything I'm describing here is not impossible. You can do all of that on your own. And then lastly, take care of your emotions and energetics, especially if you're dealing with a child. They are mirrors of us. And I can't tell you how often, it's like, I have a lot of friends that won't work with kids, because you're really just working with two clients, right? You're dealing with the anxiety of the parent, right? And I understand it. So take care of your emotional and anxiety. Part of this is your sleep. And this is where I am a major lover of the steroids, so you can sleep. I want you all to sleep, right? That is the time to, and that's the area that struggles the most at first, right? And that's the area that drives people to getting support sometimes. So that's the time. If you're going to use steroids and you don't want to use them, or if you don't want to use steroids, be okay with using it in that context so you can get some rest, because no one's healing without rest. Okay. And think of what else you can do to support yourself emotionally, energetically. There's a lot. There's a lot, right? Maybe you need to go take the Epsom salt bath. And I love Epsom salt baths for kids. There's things you can put. I love, like, easy things you can do. I had a kiddo, a very small child once, that had, like, oozing eczema, and the mom lived in the US, but her parents lived in Central America, and she went to visit with her baby. And I just love hearing about these cultural things that they do. And they put her in the kitchen sink with a bath of stinging nettle. Now, by the way, that will sting. So that's why it's called stinging nettle. But it took out the oozing, the whatnot. And there's a lot of options. It's just a matter of, and that's kind of when you do that's why I want you to always do that, your own intake, or like your own, what's the origin story? What's what's kind of patterns am I seeing? Because that's going to guide you on, like, really specific strategies. But I always like to keep things simple in, what can you, because people are always like, I tried everything. Sounds like you tried a lot of topical products and you changed your laundry detergent and etc. You did a lot of things in one corner. Well, you've got other things you can do. I've seen people start to heal their hand eczema by doing nervous system work and supporting their emotional and energy. Like, I've had people, because if someone comes to me and they're just like a basket case, I'm like, and they've already done a zillion functional medicine things, I'm like, I'm going to tell you, you're going to go do some nervous system stuff. Do this every day. And then she replied to me like 3 weeks later, and she's like, you basically hung up on me and told me to go do this, and I am healing. I'm like, fantastic. That's great. Because guess what? There's no healing that happens in a really hyper-aware, like hyper-arousal state, right? In this fight or flight. It moves all of your blood flow away from your central cavity, which is where all the magic is happening with your organs, puts it into your arms and legs so you can run away from a tiger. So if you're just operating like that, like, it's pretty hard to recover. So That's
I love
certainly
that.
where my stuff came from, partly. It's kind of like the straw that breaks the camel's back.
Yeah. I love that breakdown. And I hope that people take away from this conversation the fact that, say your child is born with eczema, quote, right? Like the symptoms start from day one, and that's where the origin story begins. Doesn't mean they have to live with it lifelong.
No.
And there's so many ways that you can approach this. And it might be a longer path than what you have previously tried. So I really like your emphasis on giving things the right time to actually be effective in the body. I think that's huge, whether that's the right dosage or the right time span. I think that's something I don't hear enough people talk about.
Can I mention a couple things about healing journey expectations, actually, based on that? If you've had something, my opinion is that if you've had an issue for 10 plus years, it might take a little longer than if you've had it for like 5 or less years. So a baby is actually super resilient, typically. And if they had it at birth, then the answer is probably in the birth story, to be honest, usually. And like the family history, very likely going to be right there. And the microbiome is massively influenced until age 3 for sure. That's when we were kind of sort of thinking it's set up. I don't know how I feel about that, but that's like what the literature kind of says. Like, hey, you can really influence things like crazy until 3. I would say at least till 5 too. And I'm not saying by any stretch of the imagination are things set at that point. I will say when they're 5 and under, it's easier to get their buy-in for certain things. It's just easier than as they get older. Whenever you can work on something is the perfect time, by the way. But and something to just be careful with that I don't think we always think about is we just want to be really gentle as they get older and older, like 6 to 13 to 18, because there's so much psychology around food fear, around stigma, around how we look, etc. So we just want to like approach everything with love and positive psychology. I have a lot of experience with a lot of food-based stuff, but there's certain ages where I'm like, let's really keep this a positive conversation. We do not want to be cultivating food fear at these ages. So I think that's important to keep in mind. That's important to keep in mind too. So I just want to say, like, if somebody had something since birth, it doesn't necessarily mean it's going to be harder. Maybe it would be easier. Isn't that cool? Like, oh, you could always flip that on the other way. Just sort of depends, right? If it just looks kind of red and rashy, that's like that would be my ideal situation. That's easy. And then the more complicated it gets, and then it was like that first, and it gets dry and flaky, that adds layers. Then it's like more and more organ systems that just need a little more support, which tends to happen the longer we have something. It gets more complex. It just gets more layers. And then as adults, or another really common one is an adult had it as a child, and then it went away, and then they got it again as an adult on their hands. And that's usually really stress mediated. So
my wrap up to this is, and I know we've like touched on it, but I really want to go a little bit deeper, is like how exactly food impacts things like eczema.
Yeah, that's a great question. And it's highly volatile. So I'd like to back up and look at the entire industry in this conversation. In the 2010 decade, it was extremely common to go to a naturopath or something, get a paleo diet or restrictive diet and some supplements. And that was like a really standard approach.
Yeah.
I think we are starting to come out of that a little bit and go into a more nourishment-based approach and realize that food wasn't the enemy. So it's tricky because you can eat the food, like to Joey's point, it's like you could eat the avocado and have a flare, right? Technically. I could drink the kombucha and get itchy. So it's hard to see past it sometimes. But if you can see that it actually is not the food's fault, it's just the metabolism of the food that's the problem. That's the thing. So it's digestion, and digestion is not as simple as you think it is. It's totally top down. It starts when you're looking forward to your meal and you're creating enzymes in your mouth, how you chew it, what's going on in your stomach. Have you suppressed all your stomach acid with stress? Possibly. Been there, done that many times. Then how's it getting used? What happens is it goes farther down the digestive tract, small intestine, large intestine, right? How's that getting used? How is your body extracting nutrients, etc.? But basically, if you're having reactions from foods, there's an issue with some metabolic process, like how are you breaking down histamines, how are you breaking down carbs, how are you breaking down proteins. I promise. It may be subtle, it may not be obvious. People might say, I'm digesting foods fine. I don't see any undigested food in my stool. Yeah, I don't see steak undigested in my stool either. But I promise that everyone needs to love on their amino acid metabolism. Like protein digestion, which starts with good stomach acid, which is suppressed by stress, is actually a really big problem. You'd be surprised. So as evidenced by anyone who has low B12, probably not very good stomach acid digesting those animal proteins and absorbing it. There's always so much freaking nuance to the things that pop out of my mouth, I feel like, because I could say, you have low B12, but in the years I've been practicing, the reference rate for B12 has just gone down and gone down, meaning people are like sicker, like they are more depleted, and it's not going to get caught on it. Like if you're just looking at it for black and white, I think under 500 for a B12 is low, right? So, and also like people aren't checking that very commonly. So.
Yeah. How do you feel about these methylation tests where you can basically swab the inside of your cheek and see how your genes are methylating various things?
That is also like a hot topic. I don't get very wrapped up in that. I just haven't really seen it personally be an end all be all. And what bothers me is like, well, if everyone needed folate, okay, first of all, 60%, we think probably 60% of people at least have a imperfection with how they're metabolizing methylation pathways or MTHFR, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so how did we live before we knew that? I'm not really sure how we could have lived. Like, I don't know. My thought is like, we only know as much as we know in that moment, but I don't over focus on that whatsoever and have lived a great life with lots of great client success, and life goes on. So anything to me, what gets me is anytime someone says you just need something forever, I'm like, not sure about that. I mean, that doesn't really make sense, right? Like how did we function before? But that's just me. So, how do you feel about it?
To the guy in the room who doesn't know what we're talking about, help me understand what this topic was.
So a lot of people have been talking about, I mean, a lot of what we've talked about, right? Like it's not necessarily the food that's the problem, it's our body's digestion, or it's not necessarily like this nutrient deficiency, it's your body's inability to like methylate it properly. And so a big thing right now is like, oh, you can kind of test your genes and your genetic makeup to see how well you methylate various things. And the MTHFR gene mutation, I don't know a ton about it, but it's a big one, right? I think it has all these implications for ways that things can go sideways or be a little encumbered or whatever. And so I'm asking, how does that play a role in our understanding of having overall good health? And I agree. Anytime someone's like, hey, you just need this one magic pill for the rest of your life and you'll be good to go. It's like, well, that doesn't, humans like don't need constant input aside from like food, water, air. Like it shouldn't be like a constant pharmaceutical input all the time, because that doesn't really resonate.
That makes sense. So when Krista was saying, hey, we haven't needed this for how many years, and why is it that somebody needs to have an input for the rest of their life? So the test is a swab you do to see if or at what level you need XYZ input. And the thought is you take this input for an indefinite period of time. Is that kind of what we're talking about?
Yeah, I don't know a ton about it, to be honest.
I have an analogy for it, but first, what sells and what's easy and like takes shape, that like runs in like a sales and marketing world is like, let me make the problem very simple and reduce it to one line, and then let me sell you this one answer. I just don't resonate with that particular answer. I've not found. So the really good news is there's multiple approaches to everything. So that's cool. My preference is a synergistic food-based. I don't want to play supplement whack-a-mole the rest of my life. I don't want to be on a zillion supplements. I want to understand what things do. I want to understand the symptoms that my body is giving me. I want to be able to address things myself. I feel that is the way forward for improving medical care. Is you've got to be not just, again, be your own advocate. It's a little cliche, but it's like if you can understand how these things work together, you're just a lot farther ahead than a lot of people. And back to MTHFR and methylation. Think of it like this, Joey. The liver has it's a factory. And there are like 3 main phases to the factory, kind of the entrance and like the middle part where like everything is going around the conveyor belts, and then like when it gets sent out, like the exporting stuff. Okay, so there's 3 phases. This is legitimate, by the way. So in phase 2, like where some of the like the major, I always say it's like breaking down boxes, like loading them up on the conveyor belts. There's like at least 6 conveyor belts in the second phase of the factory, the liver factory. Glucuronidation, methylation, sulfation, can't remember them all. Methylation is 1 conveyor belt. So am I supposed to believe that 1/6 of 1/3 of the phases is like the end all be all? No, I don't go for it. I'm just not here for it. It's like it's one conveyor belt in phase 2 liver detoxification. If you look up phases of liver detoxification, you can see what I'm talking about. You can find a nice little graphic. It's like methylation. So there's a lot of nutrients that go into every piece. So that's not necessarily a negative thing. It doesn't even mean that you need to take a zillion things. It's like what's really cool is like one nutrient does a bunch of stuff, right? Just kind of like herbs do. That's a cool part about natural medicine. And I guess maybe drugs do that too, but it's not my zone. So I'm like, cool part is like nettles are really mineral rich and they have antihistamine properties, right? And how cool, like, and they do other things too, right? So
is that the thing my mom's growing in her backyard?
Yeah, your mom actually has stinging nettle in her backyard. Oh, it's all this. It's all stinging.
Well, I mean,
it's all the same properties.
I think when I say nettle, I mean stinging nettle. Is how I'm saying it. There's probably many types of nettle because that's how herbs are. There's probably many, but that's the only one I'm ever referring to. Sorry.
When we play volleyball at family, like 4th of July picnic in his parents' backyard, and the ball goes towards a particular tree.
The forest of nettles.
She's like, watch the stinging nettle. Don't touch it.
And I'm like, might as well plant poison ivy.
And I'm like, why are we planting
natural.
it?
Is she planting it?
Well, I think maybe she discovered some and then she propagated some. I don't really know, but like
she is definitely 100% nurturing that crop.
I was like, can we move it?
She's like hyped about the nettles
or can we move the volleyball court?
The volleyball thing is so far and few between, right?
It
is.
The
nettle is forever for her, right?
It was funny though in that moment.
She's a holistic practitioner, so she's like in, she's in the zone, and she is one of the people who, like, when his brother was like eating cheese at night and then was going to bed itchy, she was like, hey, it's a histamine response, you should do this instead and try to support your body this way. But to your point, it's like stinging nettle is high in minerals. Is the high mineral solving your histamine response, or is it the fact that it's also antihistamine? You know what I'm saying?
Such a good question. You need all the nutrients to do all these processes. So like all those enzymes need nutrients. So you can't go wrong loving on your foundational nutrition systems and being really like food-based synergistic with minerals, etc. So you're totally right about you cannot go wrong. That's kind of a thing that I don't think is emphasized enough, is that we need to really support foundations quite well. We just really need to, we can't always be in a protocol or in a healing phase. Sometimes we just have to be restorative.
Yeah.
So I don't know how else to say that super easily, but it's kind of like when people ask me about fasting, I'm like, well, if you are not in a nourished state, it is only going to make things worse. Like if you're already undernourished, which, that means like your adrenals are already tapped out. You're already depleted in things. It's not going to be, it's just going to be insult at that point, for sure. So just a common one that pops up depending on where people come from. Sometimes I get clients from fasting communities and then they're asking me that question. So.
Yeah, no, it's a question that comes up here a lot too. I love this. I love that you take this emphasis on, like what you said, the synergistic approach versus a hypergranular, which focuses on one thing or one element of a process, because that's why the wellness world gets so confusing, is when you hear all these different voices and you're really not sure, and you're just looking at your child or maybe yourself who's dealing with complicated symptoms, and it's like, gosh, what am I to do? So I appreciate your approach a lot.
Well, thanks. I wish it would fit in one sentence, but with time, maybe we'll get there. The one sentence is like assess, intervention, reassess, right? And so the assessment part was like, do a good history. I mean, it's like sometimes the answers are in front of us. We can admit that sometimes when it's us, like we're a little blind unfortunately, and that's okay. So just don't worry. If you get it written down, you could always ask for a second set of eyes if you needed to, if you're not really sure.
Yeah, I love that. Did you have any other questions?
Oh my gosh. I have learned so much that I feel like if I keep asking questions, I'm going to be the problem. The information can probably keep coming, but I don't know that I could keep taking it in.
Yeah, Joey's brain is
I love it though.
at max capacity.
Yeah, sorry for slowing you guys down.
No,
I loved it because it told me what made sense. I mean, it was good because like maybe Liz was grasping it, but then maybe
100%.
someone else wasn't, and then it's
100%.
like, and then it's really good because I just need people to ask for what they need. I mean, how else? I mean, you were the advocate for the person who needed me to say it in a different way, right?
The reviews on this episode are going to be, take Joey off the show so we can get more.
No, that'd be great. Put him on so we can understand what's going on. And I also loved when he would grab his notebook and write things down. Man after my heart, because like I love taking copious notes when people are talking. For some reason, it's just how my brain likes to function.
Joey's like, I gotta jot that down.
We will not make it if I don't write it down. At least I won't make it.
Yeah, awesome. Well, this episode has been, I know, super informative for myself as well. And I'm really grateful for your time, Christa. Thanks for being here. Let people know where they can find you.
I am everything you can find at my website, which is my name, christabiegler.com. I have a podcast called The Less Stress Life and YouTube channel called Less Stress Life. And if you're on Instagram, I'm anti-inflammatory nutritionist. So not to try to make it complicated, but if you go to christabiegler.com, you find everything.
I love that. I love that. It's a one-stop shop. Awesome. Well, I know people will definitely be flocking to that resource because you are a wealth of knowledge. So thanks for being here.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Christa.
Thanks for having me.
Christa Biegler. Biegler. Darn it.
She said either one works.
She has left the virtual chat, and oh my gosh. If y'all are out there and you're hanging with me at this point, she might be one of the smartest people I've ever talked to.
Yeah, she's fantastic.
Holy smokes. At least in her, like, right? Like, everybody's brilliant that we talked to on here, but it's like her
little corner of expertise, not that it's small, but like, it's so pungent.
Yeah.
And for someone who has watched friends deal with it and have dealt with it herself, it's such a valuable tool to hear someone talk about things in a way that just makes sense with your physiology. And I can think of so many examples of people I wish I could have given this information to sooner. So I'm very thankful for her taking time, coming on the show, recording an hour and a half with us. I know we're trying to keep our episodes a little bit tighter, but man, I just think it's worth it when we can kind of dive in.
I looked down, saw it was an hour and a half, and thought, oh shoot.
I saw when we were getting to like the 45-minute mark, and I was like, I still have so much to cover.
It was just the faucet was on.
It was so, and not even like we weren't talking about the right things. We were just like getting in deep, and it was amazing. Anyways, if you like today's episode, do us a favor and leave a review and or a rating or both, because that helps push the podcast on the various platforms. It helps us get the word out, helps us connect more people to amazing folks like Christa. So helps out.
We love that. Go check out Christa too.
Yeah,
she
absolutely.
seems so delightful, and would probably talk to you too. Can almost guarantee it. So
absolutely.
Hit her up and send her questions to her. The follow-up to this is we've got a lot of other things going on here. And so if you want to keep continuing to support us and support yourself, we have a Substack channel. So you can leave us a review. You can also go to the Substack and get exclusive content on there, both in podcast form and in, what would you call it, newsletter, blog format? Written form? Written form. You can find that in the show notes of this episode. You can go to our Instagram, homegrown_education, to find that Substack community as well. It's $8 a month. That supports kind of the things we got going on here. So go check that out. We've also got a goods retail store called hazelmeyergoods.com. Shoptheh.com is how you can get there. Everything from your lard dish soap to your proofing baskets for your sourdough to your coffee and your tea. We got wooden kitchen utensils. Get on there, shoptheh.com. Get yourself some awesome stuff for your house and for your everyday life. And we've got curriculum to get you and your kids in the real food game. Homegrowneducation.org. You can find what's for dinner. If you ever ask this question or feel the tension of what's for dinner, we've created some resources and some things to help you solve that problem. Homegrowneducation.org. You can find that there. Am I missing anything? You can find us on Instagram. I'm on there. Joey Hazelmeyer. at Joey Hazelmeyer, Elizabeth or Liz at Liz Hazelmeyer, and again at Homegrown _ education. I mean, you can find us on YouTube. If you're not watching us there now, we're on YouTube.
Mm-hmm.
Homegrown _ education. I think
we're in there.
Yeah. Check us out. Thank you so much for listening. Until next time.